Today I'm joined by Paul Goode, CEO at Glucotrack. Paul, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So tell me, how'd you get into this industry? Was it always the plan for you?
I got in actually right after graduate school. I finished my master's degree, but my last course was in medical instrumentation. I studied electrical engineering and I realized I wanted to get into medical devices. And so I went back and got a PhD and got hired by a pacemaker company upon graduation and been in the industry ever since.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit more about Glucotrack here. How did you guys come to be and what does your product do?
Glucotrack actually has been around for quite some time. It started out as a non-invasive glucose sensor, and it was a company that started originally in Israel many years ago. Long story short, it's been reborn, if you will. It's been reestablished here in the U.S. and a brand new team, a brand new board, and also a brand new product. The previous product was good for its time, but other technologies passed it by, and it never really got commercial traction. And so it was time to pivot to a different technology. And so we pivoted to this technology that we've been working on the last 3 years. What this is, it's an implantable continuous glucose sensor. We realized that one of the biggest challenges with these wearable glucose sensors that are on the market today, usually you see them on the back of the arm. They're phenomenal products. And many of us in the company have worked on one or more of those generations. But as good as they are, some patients have difficulty tolerating them for various reasons, whether it's an adhesive issue or it's a needle issue or it's pain or discomfort or discreteness. When you put all those together in one category, it's because it's a wearable device. So we decided, well, we can solve that by having an implantable device. And so that's how we had we licensed this technology and been working on this. We don't expect to be, taking down the giants in the space. We just expect to be able to offer this as a solution to the subset, of patients that are looking for something different for one reason or another.
From your estimation here, how big would you say the market of patients that you currently are targeting is?
That's a very good question. And we've recently gone through a very in-depth market analysis on this. Obviously, there's, and I'll keep it to US numbers for the time being, because that's what we're most familiar with at this stage. But there's about 38 million patients with diabetes in the United States. Obviously, not everybody is a candidate for continuous glucose monitoring because there's various degrees of diabetes, some requiring continuous glucose monitoring and others not. When you look at those that are insured for continuous glucose monitoring, that is a subset of patients that is about 10.7 million patients. That's the type 1 patients with type 1 diabetes who are definitely insulin dependent. And then 3 groups of type 2 diabetes patients, those who are insulin dependent, whether it be multiple daily injections or basal insulin, or those who are at hypoglycemia risk or a risk of very low blood sugars. Out of that 10.7, that one can argue, okay, that's the target. But we did a very in-depth market segmentation analysis and research because, again, this is an implantable device. Not everybody wants an implantable device, let's face it, right? So the question is, how many, being very, very, I would say conservative in our analyses, we feel like, again, that is the target that we're going after is that 10.7 million. The question is how many of those would actually, have an implant? And, we expect that to be in the 1 out of 10 to 1 out of 15 type of a range.
Yeah, I mean, I know personally, I don't suffer with any diabetes, but if I did, chances are I'd want a more long-term solution as well, which it sounds like your product is, correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's one of the things. I mean, again, the solutions on the market are great, but they do require the patient to replace them every 15 days. I have a grandson, by the way, who has type 1 diabetes. He's using one of those that are on the market. And, when I visit or they visit us and I see the burden that they have just in managing the device, no, we're not going swimming today because, you're on day 13 of your sensor and we don't want it to fall off or we got to coordinate it with the pump, or there's, a whole bookcase full of, supplies of sensors and pumps because these are all disposable items that are replaced within days and weeks. So one of the things that many patients with diabetes, gosh, if I just get rid of all of that burden of having to manage the devices, that would free up so much of my time.
So backtracking a little bit here, out of those 10.7 million, you say you're targeting around 1 out of 10 of that, so give or take a million. What would you say your current market share is?
Well, we're still pre-commercial. So
Oh,
yeah. So we're in clinical stage, and we completed a first in human study, earlier this year, and so we're working towards a submission with the FDA to do a study in the U.S. as well. So we expect to be commercial if all goes well, in a few years. So we still have a journey ahead of us through the clinical regulatory pathway.
do you operate in any other countries besides the States?
Well, the company is located. Yeah, the company's completely located in the U.S. All of our employees are in the U.S., and we're focused on, a U.S. Trial, for the start next year, working through that with the agency.
What does that trial process look like?
A good question. So, typically, the FDA has multiple divisions, like some for cardiology, some, and so forth. And so the division that we work with, they like to use a process called the pre-submission process or the pre-sub process. And that's where you have semi-formal discussions with the agency. You approach them with what you want to do. You provide them, let's say, a protocol design, some details about your device and the safety of your device and so forth. And then they review, and then they give feedback back to you. Well, you might want to consider this, or we're okay with that, and so forth. And that's called the pre-submission process. And our particular division likes to effectively use that process, multiple iterations until it's time to do an actual formal submission, which is called an IDE submission or investigational device exemption submission. And at that point, there's typically a 30-day response on whether it's approved or not. So by having everything worked out in the pre-sub process, they can guarantee a quick turnaround on the IDE submission itself. And then at that point, you would be allowed to execute your protocol in whichever centers that you're targeting, but then from there, you also have to have what we call in the U.S. the institutional review boards, but they're like ethics committees. OUS is typically the term. Each institution would also need their own IRB or a central IRB type of approval as well. Of course, getting the FDA approval really helps with that, but at the end of the day, you have those approvals, and then you can start your clinical trial.
And you guys haven't started your clinical trials yet, right?
Not in the U.S.
Where have you started them?
So we started a trial in Brazil. We did a first in human trial. It was a short-term trial. It was designed to assess the safety of placing the device and removing the device. Just to be a little clear, our device is an intravascular device, so we sense glucose in the blood itself, which is the gold standard. So our device goes in, or at least the sensor element goes in, very much like a cardiac pacemaker lead. But instead of going all the way down into the heart and anchoring there, it just goes a few centimeters into a vein, and that same vein that the cardiac pacemakers use, and it rests there without any anchoring. So what we wanted to prove was that that this was a safe procedure, a subset of the cardiac pacemaker procedure. We figured it would be, but we wanted to gather proof of that. So we did an acute study in hospital where we had the leads placed and connected to, the lead came out of the skin and connected to externalized electronics that were taped on the surface of the skin. And we kept the patients in hospital for about 5 days, and Monday through Friday, and then released them, or removed the lead, of course, and then released them. And we had very good results there, both in terms of safety. We had no major safety events, no unanticipated safety events. And we also found that the device worked very well from an accuracy standpoint. From there, we got approval to start a small trial in Australia for a long-term, for a 1-year study. And so that study has started. We're in early stages of that study.
All right. By the sounds of it, you guys don't only want to target the US. Are you looking at launching this product worldwide?
Yes. Our first target is U.S. Europe used to be the first target, and of course that all changed about 5 years ago with the changing regulations there, and became easier to go to the U.S. And so, we're targeting the U.S. first. Pretty much, all the documentation and clinical evidence that's needed for U.S. approval is also needed for European approval. So it's an incremental lift to get CE mark and to commercialize in Europe, in the EU nations, and then as well as, of course, as being in Australia, we're considering those opportunities as well.
Shifting gears a little bit here, How long does one of these devices actually last for? Well, how long do you suspect, I guess, it lasts for, considering you're not fully finished with it yet?
Yeah, good questions. Yeah, to put things in context, current wearable devices last. The two leading companies, their solutions last for 15 days. Before it needs to be replaced, and they recently both got around. Last year or two got around 15-day approval, and they control about 90% of the market. There is an implantable that is on the market, who a year ago got approved for a 1-year longevity, which is great. And they've done great work. But they still require a wearable to power the implant and collect data from it, wirelessly. They're working on a solution that does not require a wearable, but they're not, their timeline to get there is about roughly the same as our timeline, maybe a little bit sooner. Anyway, so they're 1 year. And so we anticipate our product is designed for 3 years. So 3-year longevity. Obviously, we have not run a clinical trial after 3 years yet. So how do we get to that point of 3 years? It's through a lot of bench testing and animal studies and in silico modeling to come up with that determination.
So I can imagine right now, diabetes is a very expensive condition to treat, if I'm not mistaken. How, if your product does hit that 3-year benchmark, how would it compare to the current 15-day solutions out there cost-wise?
Yeah, another really good question, because one imagines an implant's going to cost more, right? As opposed to a disposable that you throw away. Interesting, and again, these are U.S.-based numbers, but based upon government-based healthcare in the U.S., which covers a large portion of people in the U.S. The government-based reimbursement is about for those commercial-based products is about $2,700 a year. Is what they pay those companies for those products going to the patients. We anticipate, because our device is very similar to a cardiac pacemaker lead placement, that reimbursement through the same government agency is about $8,100 a year. But our device lasts for 3 years. So we're aiming to target basically that same type of reimbursement, because it's roughly the same effort for the physician, it's roughly the same device form factor, and therefore we should be on par with current disposable CGMs. Now, those prices may come down with competition. There are many wearable CGM companies coming mostly from Asia, and they have really started to penetrate the market in Europe, and they are lower cost. They have yet to penetrate the market in the US, but it'll happen, and prices may come down. And if that does happen, then we may be a little bit more expensive.
So, Paul, before we hop off here, if you had a magic wand, and this magic wand could fix any of the problems in your business right now, what would it be and why?
Capital raise. I'll quote the late, great Alfred Mann. He was a pioneer in this space, started in diabetes, started MiniMed, but prior to that, he did a pacesetter, pacemaker company, and quite a few others. And he said the 3 important rules, or 3 important factors for a successful company, are capital, capital, and capital. And I remember him saying this, over 20 years ago. And it's very true. It is, and in today's markets, capital raising is very challenging for all MedTech. A lot of dollars are running into the AI space and cryptocurrency and so forth. Other hot places where there's a much quicker return for the dollar. And so MedTech is not as funded maybe or easy to fund as it has been in previous years. So I would say, could raise it, if there's fundraising were a bit more plentiful and, a little bit easier to get, I think that could really propel us into much more progress, much quicker, and get this product to patients who could use it.
Can imagine as much. So, Paul, a few more things. Where, if anybody does want to get in touch with you, could they do so?
Sure. So our website is www.glucotrack.com. We do have a query link, for people, and we monitor that on a regular basis. So if, for questions and solicitations. And so we're definitely, keep an eye on that. So that can be done. And of course, I have a LinkedIn page. You reach out to there. I should be more diligent at following all my invites and so forth. But I have a LinkedIn page, and happy to reach to me there at Paul Goode on LinkedIn.
Awesome. And then last but certainly not least, do you have any last pearls of wisdom you'd like to leave to our audience?
Good question. But there's so many learnings over the years. I would say that probably one of the biggest things is we live, of course, the world is much smaller these days and international. And your questions were around where else do you plan to commercialize and so forth. One of the things that I've seen over and over throughout my career, and it's independent of product type, is that every geography is different, and the results in one geography don't always carry over to another geography exactly the same. And so whether it be medical practice is different, whether it be surgical techniques are different if it's a surgery-based product, whether it be human behavior is different, one or the other always tends to confound transitioning from one geography to the next. So when one considers doing a lot of studies, let's say the conventional roadmap has always been to do less expensive studies and less expensive geographies. That used to be Western Europe, and now it's more Eastern Europe and Australia and other places. And then coming to the U.S., it doesn't always translate. Most of the times, there's new learnings in the U.S. that can impact the study performance. So the word of wisdom, to make a long story short, is prior to doing a pivotal trial in the U.S., which would be a trial for regulatory approval for commercial sale, it'd be wise to repeat whatever clinical activity you had OUS in the U.S. Or, if you're going vice versa, right? If you're doing studies in the U.S. first, you want to go to Europe, it'd be wise to do some European studies there to make sure that, medical practice and patient behaviors and so forth are comparable in real life.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for being here. I'm sure our audience would love this episode.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, and have a great day.